Hey look, PhilosophyTube posted a new video. Beauty in ugly times, huh? Alright, let's go.
This video was supposed to be about the definition of beauty, looking at two novels by Vladimir Nabokov, Lolita and Ada. I tried to make a video that wasn't about... yeah. I failed. This is the video I made.
Hedonism goes all the way back to the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus, who was nothing like the indulgent hedonist stereotype.
Cool, I'm glad he acknowledges that.
The first is kinetic, that's the pleasure you get from satisfying a desire, like scratching an itch. But the second is katastematic. That's the contentment that comes from not having any desires at all. He actually thought we should let go of desire in order to reach a kind of state where we do not want anything more, and are therefore, he thinks, happy with life.
Ooh, I really don't like the way he said that.
It's an idea that comes up a lot in various religious and spiritual teachings too. But, again though, that just doesn't seem like a very good life.
Oh no.
Why would we ever seek out anything beautiful? Why would we ever create anything beautiful if we didn't have any desires? Where would art be without the desire that beauty provokes? One thing that Epicurus doesn't really seem to consider is that a life where you don't desire anything...
Please don't go down this path.
That's depression, dude.
No, God!
That's just kind of what depression feels like.
No, God, please, no! 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 No!
I've been a fan of PhilosophyTube for many years now. I eagerly await each new video, and until Beauty in Ugly Times, I've always found them compelling. Now, as you may have guessed from that dramatic reenactment, I was frustrated with this most recent video. Shocking, I know. Someone was wrong on the internet. But plenty of people are wrong on the internet all the time, and I haven't made reaction videos to any of them. I think the way in which PhilosophyTube, Mr. Tube, Mr. Thorn? Can I just call you Ollie? I'm just going to call you Ollie. I think the way in which Ollie was wrong is crucial to understanding why he doesn't find the peace of mind that hedonism actually offers. So I've made this video in an effort to provide comfort to anyone who is struggling. Also, I hope Senpai notices me. Ataraxia, or hedonism in a time of plague. Part 1. Approaching philosophy. My approach to philosophy is pragmatic, or even instrumentalist. Now, while I hope my beliefs comport with reality, I'm actually more concerned about whether or not those concepts help me live a good life. Now, on the one hand, for example, it may be true that I am a meat robot living in a wholly determined universe, and that metaphysical free will and choice are entirely illusory, and that responsibility, my ability to respond, is in a sense the only free will that exists. Yeah, that might very well be true, but I don't see how Dennett's work helps me live a kinder or more just life. On the other hand, it may also be true that Aristotle's taxonomy of friendships is overly simplistic, that there are overlaps and gradients he fails to account for, and that social conditions have changed so much in 2 millennia that a new taxonomy ought to be developed. Yeah, that might be true as well, but I find Aristotle's model a useful tool in thinking about how I should treat others and what kind of friendships make life better. Now, I'm not certain of Ollie's stance on philosophy. If he's ever stated it directly, I missed it, or more likely, I've forgotten it. It seems to me that he's turning to philosophy for some kind of consolation. Oh, I'll get to you, Boethius. Maybe not today, but I'll get to you. How many are turning to philosophies now for strategies for coping with the absurdity of the pandemic caused by the novel coronavirus, hoping that some great thinker of the past might give them some insight into the present? And I think, in fact, Epicurus has some good answers. Now, before going any further, let me say that I'm no Epicurean scholar. My sense of Epicurus prior to watching Beauty and Ugly Times was largely informed by the quotes from Epicurus that Seneca included in his moral letters to Lucilius. Hell, before researching this essay, I didn't realize that the entirety of Epicurus's surviving works are contained in the Lives and Opinions of the Eminent Philosophers by Diogenes Laërtius, the so-called Vatican sayings, and various fragments and quotations. Most of what has survived was preserved by Diogenes. He gives a biography and provides an overview of Epicurus's philosophy. He also collects 3 complete letters from Epicurus and 40 maxims commonly called the Principal Doctrines. I think if Ollie were to reread Epicurus's letter to
Menoeceus.
Epicurus's letter to Menoeceus, he may find more insight and comfort than he found in the Principal Doctrines. Like Epicurus, I began to study philosophy when I was 14. My 9th grade English teacher, Mrs. Aldrich, introduced me to the study of philosophy. She assigned us to read selections from Aristotle and Machiavelli. Later on as a class, we read Ayn Rand's Anthem, and on my own, I read several other works by Rand, which explains how I became the pretentious you see before you today. 15 years ago, Christ, how has it been 15 years already? 15 years ago, I completed my bachelor's degree in art history and the humanities with a minor in philosophy. Now, if Ollie can do literary analysis and reference art history, I can do philosophy. Though I have to say that Ollie referencing Turner's The Slave Ship or the slavers throwing overboard the dead and the dying, typhoon coming on, as an example of a beautiful painting? That's a yikes from me, bro. The philosophers who've most shaped my thinking are probably Seneca and Albert Camus. Hell, I've even read some Nietzsche, just like every other perfectly average white suburban American male who thinks he's got above average intelligence. Though, I'm far too humble to make some kind of stupid joke. Part 2. Why I am so wise. I'm not that wise. Part 3. You know, maybe I'm not being entirely fair to myself. Let me try that again. I'm not that wise. At least, I'm not that wise in any ultimate sense. After all, didn't Socrates believe that true wisdom was essentially the recognition of the limits of one's own knowledge? Epicurus admits that there are degrees of wisdom, that one person can be wiser than another, though I don't believe that wisdom can easily be measured along a single scale. It may be more useful to think of wisdom as being measured along multiple scales. Now, I've learned a lot from watching Philosophy Tube over the years. I do think, however, that I have a more pragmatic and, in fact, a deeper understanding of Epicurus than Ollie does. I think I finally got something to teach him. And maybe what I have to say can help you find some comfort too. Part 3. The Absurdity of Coronavirus. Ollie mentions Camus' The Myth of Sisyphus, and I think before we get to Epicurus and what his philosophy can teach us, it makes sense to pause and think about the moment we are experiencing now, because we are indeed in an absurd situation. Camus explains the absurd is born from this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world. We need meaning, but the universe is meaningless. We need order, but the universe is chaos. Now, there are many ways to respond to the absurd. Camus describes 4: Don Juan, or the seducer, the actor, the conqueror, and the artist. Each of these responses requires us to rebel against the meaninglessness of life and to create meaning for ourselves. Ollie, already an actor and an artist, seems to want to be a seducer as well when he says...
And when Plato says that true beauty lies in contemplation, I'm like... I don't know how you can say that when... To be stuck indoors, to be deprived of company, to be starved of touch, to be barred from passion and pleasure, the things that make life enjoyable. I'm like, Plato, you dead Greek, how dare you say that beauty lies in contemplation when you are surrounded by opportunities to experience it, and I am, like, medically safe, but spiritually poisoned for a lack of beauty. Forget contemplation. Contemplate my Plato. Just give me the beautiful things that I desire. Please, just let me have some pleasure in life. Give me hedonism.
Hedonism is a perfectly valid response to the absurdity of the coronavirus pandemic. Pleasure is possible, even now, even though it may not seem like it. But it does take an act of rebellion in order to find it. I think Camus would urge us to fully accept the present situation in all of its absurdity. I think he would argue that wishing that things were different in this situation is useless. A man devoid of hope and conscious of being so has ceased to belong to the future. Now, that may sound grim, but Camus later elaborates. Before encountering the absurd, the everyday man lives with aims, a concern for the future, or for justification. He weighs his chances. He counts on someday his retirement or the labor of his sons. He still thinks that something in his life can be directed. In truth, he acts as if he were free, even if all the facts make a point of contradicting that liberty. Here, Camus echoes a point that the Stoic philosopher Seneca makes in his essay on the shortness of life. The advice of both seems to be abandon our hope of the future in order to live in the now. That, in fact, by living for tomorrow, we waste today. Accepting the reality of this moment and yet still finding happiness, that is a rebellion. In fact, Camus ends the myth of Sisyphus with, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy." So in a sense, Ollie was right. Turning to hedonism now, finding pleasure now, choosing to be happy now, well, that's punk as hell. Part 4. Hedonism in a Time of Plague. Epicurus liked making taxonomies.
He actually thought there were two kinds of pleasures. The first is kinetic, that's the pleasure you get from satisfying a desire, like scratching an itch. But the second is katastimatic. That's the contentment that comes from not having any desires at all.
Now, during that discussion, Ollie conflates two Epicurean taxonomies that are related but distinct in my mind. Epicurus describes a taxonomy of pleasures and a taxonomy of desires. And I'm going to tackle them in that order. Like Aristotle, Epicurus seemed to love making hierarchies. He grouped the pleasures broadly into the two categories that Ollie describes, the kinetic, or action-oriented pleasures, and the katastimatic, or state-of-being pleasures. But then, within those categories, he further breaks down each type of pleasure. The lowest pleasures are the kinetic pleasures of the body. Epicurus points out that the bodily pleasures are immediate and only available in the present. And I'd like to extend this and point out that many, if not most, of the bodily kinetic pleasures require something beyond oneself, such as food or drink, or friends, or a lover. Eating a ripe peach, for example, is pleasurable, but once you've eaten that peach, it's gone, and along with it, all the pleasure. Kinetic pleasures of the mind are higher because Epicurus believed that the mind can travel between the past, the present, and the future. Though one question I have is whether or not Epicurus would consider remembering eating a peach or imagining eating a peach in the future, which are fundamentally the same thing, as forms of mental kinetic pleasures. The only specific examples Epicurus gives of mental kinetic pleasures are cheerfulness and joy. Now, this felt odd to me at first. Surely joy and cheerfulness should be state-of-being pleasures. But then I asked myself, how long do I experience joy? Not long. Though that may just be because I'm prone to melancholy and depression. But the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. We say we enjoy a movie or a meal, right? We are literally in joy during those experiences. Cheerfulness lasts longer and is easier for me to maintain. I think that phrasing is key. Easier to maintain. There's some amount of work, however slight, required for me to be cheerful. At the very least, I have to push aside negative thoughts and inconveniences. Epicurus divided the katastimatic pleasures similarly along the body and the mind. These states are sometimes referred to by their Greek words, aponia and ataraxia. Yes, we're finally going to talk about ataraxia. And you may have already guessed, at this point, that it's the higher of the katastimatic pleasures. Aponia is the katastimatic pleasure of the body. It is freedom from pain. Bodily pain for Epicurus was aches and pains, sure, but he also included hunger and thirst. I imagine a fuller definition might encompass freedom from illness as well. So what, then, is Ataraxia. Ataraxia is the first track from Team Sleep's 2005 self-titled debut album.
Well, that was a deep cut.
Yeah, well, you know what they say. Ataraxia is the freedom from disquietude of the mind. Tranquility is an excellent synonym. Dr. Tim O'Keefe writes, given Epicurus's conception of pleasure, it might be less misleading to call him a tranquilist instead of a hedonist. Ataraxia's freedom from anxiety and worry, yes, but also from melancholy and misery and the fear of death. I've had moments, sometimes even days, since the start of this pandemic that I would describe as ataraxic, but it hasn't been constant by any means. I get it. Yeah, we are living in a scary time. As Ollie says,
There's nothing to look forward to. There isn't even any looking forward. In his video, I Can't Stop Watching Contagion, Dan Olson says that this pandemic has messed with our concept of time. 2 weeks ago feels like ancient history. The present is just a prison, and the future is blank.
time has at once been shrunk down to the present, but also before us lie deserts of vast eternity. There are lots of things that people are worried about, and rightly so. I'm in a very fortunate position. I'm healthy, I don't need to take any daily medications, I have a job, I'm able to work from home. But even when that work from home order came, I wasn't entirely at ease at first. Ataraxia was still elusive. I'm a public school teacher in Massachusetts. My school building closed down on March 13th, and we've had a shifting schedule of possible reopenings. Until Governor Baker announced on April 21st that schools would be closed for the remainder of the 2019-2020 school year, I thought I was going back into my classroom on May 4th. And I feared that I might be an asymptomatic carrier and that I might get my students, their families, or my colleagues sick. I worried that I might get sick right before going back to school, or that after reopening that I might catch it from one of my students or my colleagues. Those worries did keep me up at night. But once Governor Baker made the call that school buildings would be closed for the remainder of this year, I was able to let go of most of my worries about the novel coronavirus. After I finished writing this section of the script, I found out that my principal is exercising his option not to renew my teaching contract. This has reintroduced some worry when I think about the future. Ataraxia is not a constant state. So when I first watched the video, I felt something was amiss when Ollie said,
and I've got that Epicurean catastematic state where I don't desire anything, but it's not because I'm 100% content. It's because I'm miserable.
Because earlier in his video, he had said,
and I am like medically safe, but spiritually poisoned for a lack of beauty.
That didn't lead me to think that he was really in a state of catastematic pleasure. I couldn't imagine Seneca the Stoic praising and quoting Epicurus if his conception of the highest good was so flawed. Now, I didn't have the Epicurean vocabulary then, but it's clear to me now that while Ollie was experiencing aponia, he isn't experiencing ataraxia. He rejects its very merits. He desires desire. Part 5, Desire. When Ollie says,
that's depression, dude.
I think he misses the mark. My reading of Epicurus is influenced by my studies of Stoicism and Buddhism, as well as my meditation practice. And I could probably write an entire essay on my history with Buddhism alone. Let me know in the comments below if you would watch a video about a middle-aged white American nerd's opinions on Buddhism. However, I think I need to talk about it quickly in order to provide some context. I was raised mostly without religion, and I first learned about Buddhism in one of my social studies classes in middle school. I can still remember hearing about the Four Noble Truths for the very first time. 1. Life is suffering. 2. Suffering is caused by desire. 3. Ending desires ends suffering. 4. Following the Noble Eightfold Path ends suffering. That was powerful, heady stuff. I wanted my suffering to end. I could see the almost syllogistic logic of those tenets. In short, I wanted to be convinced. But, just like Ollie, I thought at the time that a life without desires would be misery. Still, the idea of a path to the end of suffering stuck with me. I continued reading about Buddhism outside of my classwork. Some time later, I think it was years later really, I saw a different translation. 1. Life is suffering. 2. Craving causes suffering. 3. ending craving ends suffering. 4. Following the Noble Eightfold Path ends craving and suffering. This translation made all the difference in the world. It's not desire in and of itself that causes suffering, but desire colored by a sense of need. This understanding of desire plus need is what led me to begin a meditation practice that I've kept up, on and off, though mostly off, since college. I found that I've been able to reduce my cravings for things while still experiencing desires and wants. I know that's pretty abstract, so let me analyze a concrete example. Ollie talks about wanting a hoodie from Maison Mangela.
This amazing tie-dye hoodie, which I really want to get my hands... Jesus Christ!
Now,
He desires that hoodie because he believes owning it will give him pleasure. And fair enough. But when he sees that it costs £535, he seems to be able to move on. He desires the hoodie, but he does not crave it. So therefore, this desire is neutral. If, on the other hand, that Maison Mangela hoodie obsessed his every thought, if he mistakenly thought that that hoodie alone would make him happy, would make him complete, then it would be a craving and a source of suffering. Now, maybe he thinks about that hoodie once a day, once every few days, once a week. Who knows? I'm no psychic. But he seems to be able to forget it and move on. And like Ollie, you already know what it's like to let go of certain desires. Now, finally, it makes sense to talk about Epicurus' taxonomy of desires. Did you forget? I told you there were 2 taxonomies. Epicurus describes a taxonomy of pleasures and a taxonomy of desires. I'm going to tackle them in that order. Why am I like this? Epicurus believed that desires fell into one of 3 categories: natural and necessary desires, natural and unnecessary desires, and vain and empty desires. Epicurus thought that we should pare back our desires. He wrote, "If you wish to make Pythocles wealthy, don't give him more money, rather reduce his desires." He also recognized that some desires are fundamental to the human condition, are fundamental to human existence, and are virtually impossible to get rid of. The desire for water, food, safety, and shelter are all examples. Epicurus advises finding pleasure in the simple. For food, take pleasure in bread, water, and maybe a little wine. In fact, Diogenes states that Epicurus wrote that he was content with plain bread and water, and that all he needed to turn a meal into a feast was a little cheese. Now, listen, I get that. A demi-baguette with Delice de Bourgogne and some capicola is a feast in itself. And so we see that Epicurus is far from the libertine he's often depicted as.
I apologize for nothing.
Natural and unnecessary desires are the desires of the body that we can survive without. The desire for fine food and fancy wine would be an example of a natural but unnecessary desire. Now, Epicurus did not believe we should pass up fine food or fancy wines if we have the opportunity to enjoy them. In fact, he says that the people who enjoy luxury most completely are they who are best able to do without it. When we, on certain occasions, fall into more sumptuous fare, it makes us in a better disposition towards it. If we live simply, we can enjoy the finer things when we have the occasion to enjoy them, without that dependent sense of need and craving. On the other hand, if finer things become our standard, we run the risk of becoming numb to the fineness of those things, and more than that, we also lose the ability to take pleasure in the simple. Vain and empty desires are those like the desire for power and wealth and status. An example of a vain and empty desire is my desire to be greeted by my favorite YouTube creators the way the poets in Limbo greeted Dante.
Wait, did you just compare yourself to Dante?
Yeah, I did.
So would that make Ollie Virgil?
Yeah, I guess it would. And Natalie is obviously Homer.
Hey, I'm Muse. Hey, how are you, Gorge?
After all, isn't signing up for Twitter and YouTube.com in 2020 just like voluntarily entering hell? Seriously though, why am I like this? Why the hell am I like this? Desires can often be a source of pain. This insight is shared by the Stoics and the Buddhists. For me, letting go of desires is emotional self-regulation. Imagine going to a restaurant because you want to have their delicious buffalo Brussels sprouts. After you're seated, your waiter tells you they are sold out of buffalo Brussels sprouts. Do you throw a temper tantrum? No, not unless you're 5. Either you let go of your desire for buffalo Brussels sprouts and stay, or you leave to seek them at another restaurant, or you could decide to make them at home. Link in the description. Listen, I'm not some monastic who is completely free of desire. I want a haircut and a touch-up to my blue just as much as any. I miss going outside barefaced. Though, I do have to say, I kind of feel like Strider Hear You going out in a mask. Okay, maybe more like Strider Hear You's cousin Greg, who works in IT and wants to tell you all about his timeshare on Cape Cod. Are timeshares even a thing anymore? Like, no, are they? I do have to say that I think nerdy cyber ninja might be my aesthetic.
Is that cultural appropriation? Did I just do a cultural appropriation by accident?
What I'm saying is I'm probably going to wear masks and neck gaiters long after this pandemic is over. This pandemic has taken the future away from us. In a sense, it's also taken the past, too. For the last 3 years, I've challenged myself to read 52 or more books that I'd never read. I was doing okay until quarantine happened, and now I've been practically unable to read. The person I was in January and February is gone. Listen, I'm 37 and single. I was looking forward to reactivating my online dating profile this summer. You know, that sounds like I'm asking you to slide into my DMs. Please don't slide into my DMs. And there were many, many other plans for this summer that I've had to abandon. Right now, wanting the world to be like it was is a vain and empty desire. We cannot fulfill that desire, and so we suffer the pain of our desire being frustrated and unfulfilled. I think where hedonism meets the absurd is in how we think about time. Camus tells us not to turn away from the absurd, but rather keep it in front of us at all times. In order to rediscover pleasure, we cannot turn away from the reality of this pandemic, and we must simplify our desires. Part 6. What do? So where does all of this leave us? My approach to philosophy wouldn't be very pragmatic if I couldn't offer some advice. As I mentioned before, I've not found the comfort in reading that I used to. Only, that's not entirely true. I'm not finding pleasure in reading new books. Right now, because everything is so new and overwhelming, the never-before-read book holds little interest for me. I'm less willing to take risks with reading because of how long it takes to read a book. I'm just not sure if the emotional investment is going to be worth it. However, my desire to revisit books that I love has increased. Some of the novels that I'm thinking of revisiting include An Equal Music by Vikram Seth, The Sculptor by Scott McCloud, The Sandchild by Tahar Benjaloun, The Days of Abandonment by Elena Ferrante.
Aren't those all pretty tragic books?
I'm also revisiting some of my favorite poetry collections, including Ahead of All Parting, a collection of Raina Maria Rilke's works translated by Stephen Mitchell, And After All by Rina Espaillat, Silver Chest by Carl Phillips, the collected poems of Jane Kenyon, Particularly Otherwise, and the selected poems of Edwin Arlington Robinson. What? I have a similar desire to listen to some of my favorite albums over and over again. I'm a little bit more willing to check out new music. It's less of an emotional investment to me, and I'm more willing to abandon an album I don't enjoy. Some albums that have been getting heavy rotation right now include Disintegration by The Cure, Unleft by Helios, Hospice by The Antlers, The Fountain soundtrack by Clint Mansell with the Kronos Quartet and Mogwai, Kind of Blue by Miles Davis, Low Roar's self-titled album, Every Country's Sun by Mogwai, and my personal favorite, Dust and Disquiet by Caspian. Yeah, I know. These are pretty sad too.
What's good about sad? It's happy for deep people.
So I'm returning to the familiar. I'm letting go of holding myself to the goal of reading new books. If you also find yourself needing the comfort of the familiar, indulge. Let me know in the comments below what books, albums, movies, and TV shows you are revisiting. Where will new art come from? Camus writes that art is one response to the absurd. If you consider Epicurus' writings artful, and I do, his art came from his desire to share his wisdom with others. I imagine he found the same kinetic pleasure in writing letters and books that I've enjoyed writing this essay, which also came from a place of wanting to help other people ease their suffering. Not all art comes from pain. Think of children who like to draw or paint or dance or sing just because it's fun. They do it for pure pleasure. Art is uniquely human. It is our birthright as humans and a great source of pleasure. Yes, art can come from pain. As Natalie says,
And I especially like dark comedy. You know, comedy about the things in life that are the most painful. To me, dark humor is kind of like a sad song. It takes your worst feelings, traumas, and anxieties and twists them into a source of pleasure. And don't all the finest pleasures come from pain?
Though I disagree with her that all the finest pleasures come from pain, I think we need to get away from the tortured artist myth. As Hannah Gadsby says,
this whole idea, this romanticizing of mental illness is ridiculous. It is not a ticket to genius. It's a ticket to fucking nowhere.
Art can be used for healing and restoration. It can start from a place of hurt or trauma, but then art becomes an act of self-love to respond and heal to that trauma. And further, I think we need calm in order to create. As Wordsworth is famed for having said, poetry comes from powerful emotions recollected in tranquility. While Ollie was rereading Lolita and Ada, I was rereading my favorite novel, Albert Camus' The Plague. Oh, I know. It tells the story of a town facing a sudden outbreak of bubonic plague. The town eventually goes into quarantine and everyone is cut off from the outside world. Within that absurd situation, the people stand together in solidarity. Every time I read it, I think about what we owe each other. And what we owe each other is solidarity, support, and love. And there are no easy answers to what that looks like. Yeah, I know.
There is no right answer. This is why everyone hates moral philosophy professors.
I'm on your side here, dude, but he is not wrong.
Once I knew that I was not going to be returning to my physical classroom again this year, and that instruction was moving entirely online, I signed up as a volunteer for one of the local mutual aid groups. I've bought and delivered groceries for families in my city. I helped a victim of a fire load some of their possessions in a van, and I've donated to the community fund. It's been a source of incredible pleasure to be able to help the members of my community. Now, we may be living in a new world, in a sense, but the advice for handling it is millennia old. We are free only in the present moment. There is no escape, but we can adapt and we can change. Hoping for an escape will just make us miserable. We can pare down our desires until we're able to take joy in what we have. In this way, this poem attributed to Omar Khayyam is a sort of hedonist hymn. Here, with a loaf of bread beneath a bough, a flask of wine, a book of verse, and thou, beside me singing in the wilderness, and wilderness is paradise enow. Enow is a synonym for enough. Just think of it. And wilderness is paradise enough. I think that really gets to the heart of hedonism. It is a philosophy of being content with enough. So I want to revisit aponia and ataraxia as a way of ending. Aponia is not a perpetual state. As soon as you feel hungry or thirsty, you are no longer aponic. If you have a snack or a drink, you can return to that aponic state. But a few hours later, hunger or thirst will return. And in this way, I don't really think ataraxia is a perpetual state either. If you become bored and want to see a movie, you are no longer ataraxic. You can fulfill that desire or let it go, but until you make that choice, you have lost ataraxia. The desires and needs of the body and the mind are natural parts of being human. How we respond to those desires is our freedom. Hedonism, Stoicism, and Buddhism are all paths to the same destination: tranquility and peace. Thank you so much for watching. I'd like to give special thanks to my mom for listening to me ramble about Ollie's video and about hedonism for the past 5 weeks or so. Thank you to my first readers, Barrett Lebrecq, Tom Snarsky, Matt Vucicevic, and Tanya Zook for all their insightful comments. And thank you to Christine Dempsey for watching the first rough cut of this project and suggesting areas for improvement. Please do all the YouTube things, like or dislike, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell icon if you'd like to see more from me. And if you think someone else could benefit from what I have to say, please share this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a blast making it, and I've got several ideas about what I'm going to tackle next. Please let me know in the comments below what else you'd like to hear me talk about. You can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/OwenXGray and on Facebook at facebook.com/OwenXGray. And I started a Patreon at patreon.com/OwenXGray. If you want to support my work and are financially able to do so, I would greatly appreciate it. I'm still developing the rewards, so please let me know in the comments below what rewards you would like to see. If I got something wrong, please be sure to let me know. But make sure to start your comment with, well, actually. You know, one of the most memorable moments I ever had at a concert was actually seeing Team Sleep. I went to see them when I was a senior in college on a road trip with a friend just outside Washington, D.C. And I remember at one point, Chino Marino takes the stage and he gets in front of everybody. He's like, "Are you all ready to hear some real gangster shit?" And the crowd cheers, because obviously. And then these are the first notes that started playing.